Aloha, my name is Helene, and I'm going to share with you a bit about the Haole Koa invasion in Hawaii. Lucania leucocephala is a member of the legume family. It is known locally as Haole Koa. It's native to Central America, but it has become naturalized in many parts of the world. It's a fast-growing tree, and it is commonly utilized as a nitrogen fixer and also for erosion control. As you can see in this photo here, Haole Koa has a very extensive taproot system. It also exhibits fire-stimulated growth. And then this photo here is the Ka'ivi coastline, and I'm sure if any of you have been out there, you've noticed there is a lot of Haole Koa. Also kiave and a bunch of those non-native grasses. Haole Koa was intentionally introduced to Hawaii in the late 1800s as a high-protein, drought-tolerant feed source for livestock, and it spread everywhere, which has unfortunately hindered many restoration efforts. And it also increases the risk of wildfires. Haole Koa is rated as one of the top 100 worst invasive species in the world, and among the 10 worst in the state of Hawaii. So the Hawaiian Islands are the endemic species capital of the world, the endangered species capital of the world, the extinction capital of the world, and the invasive species capital of the world. About 90% of the native species in Hawaii are endemic, meaning they are found nowhere else on Earth. The volcanic geology of the islands created very diverse biomes, and Hawaii actually hosts 10 of the world's 14 Köppen climate zones, and it is actually the only place on Earth with so many zones concentrated into such a small region. What makes Hawaii so special is the geographical isolation. That is what we have to thank for the high rate of endemism and the biodiversity we see today. Animals here, plants here evolved over 70 million years in an environment without grazing animals. There was no herbivory before human introduction. There were no frequent wildfires, and they never had to contend with the pressures of invasive species. And this does lead to consequences, vulnerable consequences. So, because these endemic species evolved into very specific roles within very specific ranges, they lack the genetic variability that many invasive species have. So they're quite vulnerable to environmental changes, whether it's due to climate change, pests, disease, and other invasive species encroaching into their habitat. They just can't compete with them. Invasive species did evolve in the presence of these pressures, so they often possess those characteristics like rapid growth, fire-stimulated growth, and many defensive and competitive traits. They very quickly dominate any landscape they are introduced to. And we see that with Coster's curse. We see that with Haole Koa and absolutely the many invasive grasses. So over 90% of Hawaiian lowland dry forests have been lost to urbanization, wildfire, and invasive species. That the elevation and moisture zones that are most compatible with human uses and residents, agriculture, have resulted in the loss of the lowland native ecosystems. Unfortunately, these were once habitat for endemic plants like the Wili Wili tree. The koa tree was once the dominant canopy tree in the lowland forest. Iliahi, which is sandalwood, of course, that was harvested and exported in the late 1800s. And what replaced this area These areas are mainly stuff like this. This is Ka'iwi coastline. Driving down from Makapu'u, you can see the Haole Koa trees and all of the dry brush behind. Lowland dry forests have largely transitioned into fire-prone, non-native grasslands due to agriculture. Invasives greatly alter the landscape. They prevent native plants from reproducing, and they greatly increase the fire hazard risk. Haole Koa is a major target species under the Natural Resource Conservation Service for brush management. Over time, as Hawaii's economy changed, agriculture greatly decreased, and the grazing livestock was removed from these pasture lands, and the lands were just left unmanaged. So now non-native species like guinea grass, Haole Koa, fountain grass take over, and they increase the fuel loads, and increased fuel loads lead to more intense fires. So why was it even brought to Hawaii in the first place? That is a very good question. It was introduced as a forage crop for cattle. The expanding beef and dairy industry really had a need for alternative feed options. It was getting very expensive to import alfalfa from the mainland. Local production of alfalfa was insufficient to meet the growing demands. It doesn't grow well here. And so Haole Koa was selected because it has high protein, a deep root system, and it has rapid growth. As you can see in this photo here, you can see the Haole Koa taproot growing through the bedrock, and that is about 15 feet long. It's pretty difficult to get rid of this tree once it's established. So at the Waimanalo Agriculture Experiment Station, 36 pounds of seeds were disseminated per acre in the late 40s, early 50s. And it was deliberately interplanted with these grasses because that was considered the ultimate cattle feed. There are reports that seeds were even broadcasted from airplanes over pasture lands. There were multiple studies done through the university and the CTAR department just to explore Haole Koa as a domestic crop. And researchers found that it's possibly beneficial because of the low production costs, minimal maintenance, and they were amazed to see that Haole Koa exhibited resilience against weeds, quickly outcompeted them, and dominated the landscape. What CTAR couldn't have known then is that the very characteristics which made the plant an attractive resource also enabled unchecked proliferation across the Hawaiian Islands. And as it turns out, Haole Koa isn't all that great for livestock anyway. Because of the rapid growth, it very quickly grows out of reach of cattle. It also contains a toxic amino acid called mimosine, which is riskier to non-ruminant mammals, humans. Mimosine is present in the leaves and seeds of the Haole Koa plant, and very high concentration in younger leaves. Prolonged exposure can have severe health issues and death in smaller animals like rabbits. Beef and dairy livestock appeared unaffected, according to the studies in the 1950s. Yet, adverse effects were documented in various regions, including severe hair loss. And mimosine has been linked to poor growth in cattle when it comprises more than half their diet. And human hair loss is seen in regions where there's frequent consumption of Haole Koa. Dealing with invasive species is expensive, but not dealing with them is far worse, and it comes at a greater cost. In recent decades, there's been a 300% surge in the annual area burned across all 4 Hawaii counties. One firefighter nearly lost his life after being impaled by a Haole Koa tree. He was fighting a brush fire on the side of the road near Waimea Canyon. And then as you can see here, this is from a wildfire on Maui in 2019, and the plant in the front is Haole Koa. The tree has different burn characteristics, so the trunk and branches will burn very slowly, and they survive fast-moving fires, while the taproot system remains intact. New sprouts will pop up immediately following a burn, and the main stem will continue to burn slowly, just emitting embers. and the seeds are encapsulated in a very thick pod, and they get very hot inside, and so they eventually pop open and they ignite new fires as soon as they hit the ground. This is a photo from a fire in 2019, and you can see the seed pods just flying all over the place. And then, of course, Lahaina, catastrophic, devastating wildfire, and really it was fueled by decades of unmanaged, fire-prone, invasive vegetation. The loss of homes, lives, and livelihoods was significant. Major human toll and economic toll. Since the fire, around $330 million in federal grants and disaster loans have been sent to Maui for recovery efforts. So what do we do? What have we done? The rise in wildfire occurrences have led to CTAR developing Fire Risk Index, which pinpoints the most vulnerable areas. They have a really great GIS map where you can zoom in on any part in the state and it'll show the fire history. But we also need proactive measures to prevent and mitigate wildfires. Yesterday I found a really interesting update. Civil Beat published a great article just trying to get ahead of this fire season. It's deemed a high-risk year this year. So HECO has a new protocol to shut the grid off during dry and gusty conditions, which is what is normally done in California, but HECO hadn't done that before. The state transportation department will be giving $9 million to clear 500 acres in fire-prone regions. On Oahu and Kauai, the fire departments are planning to pre-position their fire equipment in high-risk areas during red flag warnings, as every minute counts in a fire. It's also important for the community to be prepared. Around 60% of communities in Hawaii have a one-way in, one-way out access road. So knowing your evacuation route, making sure buildings are up to code, that you have emergency planning and readiness. And it's also very important to educate landowners on how to manage these dry grasses and shrublands. There are useful things about this plant that we could look into doing ourselves. Some practical uses are biomass. This thing grows really fast, like hemp, very fast. It could be used for pulpwood for the paper industry. It's used as firewood and charcoal in Southeast Asia. It's being promoted, not permitted, in India as livestock fodder and energy. Because it's a great nitrogen fixer, CTAR is developing a hybrid variety, which is supposed to be fertile. So the plant is also used as a food source. In Indonesia, the seeds are roasted and put in a salad with spicy fish, and they wrap it in. And then in Mexico, where the plant is from, it's called guaje, and it's often roasted and used in soups, tacos, and salsas. And I might try to make a salsa. That seems kind of interesting. Just don't consume too much but really, I think the solution comes down to ecosystem restoration. Restoration is crucial for reducing wildfire risk. It creates a more resilient landscape by allowing native biodiversity to reclaim their habitats. And restoration projects involve eliminating invasive species. So doing this will reduce fuel load levels, and that will also reduce the likelihood of these more severe fires. The Koa Action Plan was developed with DLNR and the Department of Forestry and Wildlife, and it has a focus on forest restoration as a means of fire prevention. The plan is basically looking into clearing lands out to plant koa to use as timber and to sustainably. The plan addresses issues like controlling the grazing ungulates, because they unfortunately spread invasive seeds all over the place, and proactive land management in post-fire treatments, which is being done in Maui. There are a lot of native plants going in the ground. Hopefully that can be managed before the invasives get out of control and outcompete everything. And then there are quite a few things the state has done, but securing funding is challenging for things like the Koa Action Plan. But the state is progressing. The Hawaii Department of Health is funding restoration projects in West Maui. And what I think the real solution will be is collaborative efforts that involve state, federal, and nonprofits, all with the same goal in mind, to achieve sustainable management practices. And then just going over all of this research, there were a few things that stuck out to me, and some things, and I couldn't find information about, that Haole Koa might exhibit allelopathic properties, which refers to the plant's ability to influence nearby plants by releasing biomolecules, which can impact growth and development. So it's a competitive trait that many plants have. Mimosine can act as a bioherbicide, and I would love to look into that in the future. But anyway, I know that was kind of long, but thank you, and have a great summer.